Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Tai, a space where we'll talk about anything and everything surrounding the people that grind through your month-end accounting close.
Hi, everyone. Today's episode is about how to build a strong accounting team. Our guest today is Senad Mustafic, Chief Accounting Officer at Benchling. On this episode, we'll talk about how to put together a strong accounting team. We'll discuss the high stakes of hiring, why this is worth a significant investment of time and resources, how to find your ideal candidates, and where you should be looking. Now, I'll hand it over to our host, Gapify CEO, Jotham Tai.
Hey, Senad, thanks for joining the Accounting Life podcast today. Really nice to have you today.
Jotham, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, you were really a person I wanted on this show to talk about a topic that I think is not covered enough in the accounting space. And, a lot of us get the opportunity to build teams, big teams in a short period of time. I know you've done it before in your experience. So really wanted to dig in today, specifically on the topic of how to go about, building a first-class team of accounting rock stars. So glad to have you on the show today.
My pleasure. With those few opening words, you set the expectations really high. I hope I'm going to be able to live up to those. I'll give my best, and I definitely look forward to it.
Well, and I've shared this with you, offline, but you've gone through you have experience. So I have the experience as well, but more like 10 or 15 years ago. And you really just don't appreciate how challenging it is to grow a team until you're doing it yourself. And I know you've done it a few times over. So, really just diving in and, as accountants, we like to talk about methodology and approach. So when it comes to like building a team, just to kick things off, what are your thoughts on using external recruiters versus, leaning on internal recruiters if you're, again, at a point where you're trying to build a big team rapidly?
Yeah, just to touch on something you said moments ago, it is challenging to build a team. I also think that it is very interesting. And I think that there is a lot of reasons to have a lot of passion for building out a team. We are lucky in the accounting profession that I feel we have a lot of really talented individuals who have chosen to be in the accounting field. And by having an opportunity to build a team, we are gifted with a chance to go and meet a lot of those individuals and have some say in terms of which ones of them we will work with, we will have on our teams. And I think that's a phenomenal thing and pleasure and a privilege. So I think that while it is challenging, it's also a very rewarding experience, a very interesting one, a very exciting one. In terms of recruiting approach, I think that all depends on the geography in which you're in. Whether you're particularly trying to source locally, more nationally or internationally, what your strategy is and what kind of resources you have at your disposal. In my experience, I've primarily worked with a combination of internal and external recruiters, but I do know that some companies only go for external recruiters and others go only for internal. I don't think that one or the other approach is better. It all comes down to how good of a relationship you as a hiring manager can develop with the recruiter, how much you can get on the same page in terms of what type of talent you're looking for, and how comfortable you are in delegating some of the screening effort, some of the initial screening effort to that hiring recruiter that is helping you. So it's a lot more about what kind of bond and alignment you can develop with the individuals who are recruiting, whether they're internal or external. I think that either one can work.
Well, I kind of like the idea of both, but a little bit more expensive than I'm sure they'll tell our CFOs. But I mean, if you have the option of both, right? I know in the past, external recruiters they've had access to like Big Four talent, and some of the roles that we have in accounting, you'll love having out of the Big Four. Internal recruiters obviously wouldn't have that same network, but to your point, the alignment really happens with that internal recruiter. Everything from culture and just working styles, and having that partnership with your internal recruiting team, ensures that synergy is being evaluated. So, yeah, I mean, really great points there. And you touched on something I want to double click into. So we talk about, it is a privilege and it's exciting when we get to have the opportunity to build teams. But gosh, Senad, I've seen organizations go from pre-IPO to post-IPO, and you're hiring a lot of people at the same time, but the stakes are pretty high too. If you don't, execute the hiring plan, or if you don't hire good quality people, it really could kind of shift the culture and the environment that you're trying to build. And I'll just make one last point, and then I'd love to get your thoughts on this. One example of a company that recently went public that I have been around took an approach of they just needed a lot of bodies, right? They needed to fill seats. They ended up getting profiles that were more enterprise and like stuffier. And that really changed the culture of that environment. So I don't know if you've seen or also I know in your experience, you're probably cognizant of these types of points, but what are your thoughts as I shared that experience there?
It's a balance. How fast you need to recruit and then the quality of people that you need to bring in, you have to balance between the two. In general, I am of the mentality, and this only works if you're aligned with the team members on this mentality, that we should prioritize quality over quantity or over speed whenever possible. Because if you think about having a delay on a hiring side for, let's say, 3 months, that does mean typically that you yourself and the team will suffer through an increased amount of work during those 3 months while you're looking for that ideal member to join your team. But that member is going to be with you hopefully for many years to come. And it is way more important that you find the right member that's going to deliver incredible results, have positive influence on the culture, and be a value add overall. And going through 3 months of pain to get there, I think is definitely worth it. To me, one measure of whether pain is worth it or not is to ask yourself, hey, 2, 3, 4 years from now, are we going to remember that we had to go through 3 months of extra hard work to allow for additional time to find this great talent or not? And if the answer is no, we will not remember that, then I think it's relatively insignificant. And the right thing is to focus on the best talent. Of course, you can't always do that. Sometimes the pressure of the situation, the timelines that you're working with require you to bring in somebody quicker. Right. And if that's the case, you may have to take a little bit of additional risk. But I would say whenever you can, my advice is to focus on the absolute best candidate you can get for the job.
Well, and finding that absolute best candidate, to your point, requires a lot of work, a lot of time spent. And so now give me a sense of, like, from your experience, how much time you've carved out to execute your hiring plan and the teams that you're building.
The time that I devote to recruiting goes up and down depending on circumstances, depending on time of the year. It is something that I think about as one of the primary responsibilities of my job, to bring in the right talent for the roles. And I will dedicate to it as much time as needed. That can be, a lot of time in a given week and less time in another week. It kind of depends on how many people we're looking for at the point in time and how many candidates we're seeing come through the pipeline. It also depends on the preferences of my team. I ask my team to decide in a way how much I should be involved in particular roles that maybe are not reporting directly to me. I can step in as a de facto hiring manager. I can be just one of the interviewers. I can be at the end of the interview loop. So I work with the team to kind of decide on the level of involvement. I have historically done somewhat extreme things to make sure that, in my opinion, we get the right candidate into our company. For example, I have gone on walks with a candidate who was interested in a job in the Seattle area. There's this place called Green Lake, and I walked with a candidate one time 3 miles around the lake, which is about an hour, and we talked about the company and the fit and all that stuff. I flew to Australia once because I felt that in hiring an accounting manager for that company, I felt that doing in-person interviews would be better experience for me in assessing the candidates, as well as for candidates feeling and understanding that this role was very important for the headquarters in the US. So I went to Australia for 3 days only, solely for purpose of interviewing. So I will try to do whatever it takes to get the right candidates. And sometimes when that coincides with, let's say, what in Big Four people would call busy season. So maybe it's the year end or a quarter end. It doesn't matter. I have to find a way to create that time because recruiting is that important to me. I think it's important to the organization, and we always have to put our best effort forward. That investment upfront is always going to pay off itself in the end if we hire the right person.
Well, and Senad, just to give our audience kind of a little bit more like context, what would you say to in the busy periods that you've done recruiting, is 50% out of the question of like maybe 1 week where you're just going from one interview to the next? Is that like, does that feel too much, or is that, what you've seen is, sometimes needed to get the job done?
I don't think I have personally spent 50% of my time in recruiting, but somewhere 25 to 30%, I would say definitely yes.
Yeah, so if it's that much, and that's what I've seen too in my past history of building teams, you're pretty much having to plan it within your close. And I think a lot of us accountants don't like plan that time as well as we should, right? We just think about the next month end close, or we're trying to squeeze in other projects. But when you're building a team, it's almost like you got to allocate that time, right? Because 20 to 30% is quite substantial.
It is, but I also think of recruiting as almost an extracurricular activity. Like I like to play soccer, and even in busy season, you can find time to play soccer. And recruiting, even in busy season, if suddenly you have 3 great candidates coming up for a role, and you know that they're not going to be there forever, right? They're interviewing with other companies probably, and you have to give them the attention, the time, and the space that they require. You just have to find time for that. Again, I think it's all about deciding whether that investment is worth the reward. And I think for recruiting, the answer is almost always yes. You should invest the time, because the dividends you're going to claim afterwards, after getting the top candidate onto your team, are incredibly valuable. So it's not like, hey, here is the, let's say an 8-hour or 10-hour day, and now suddenly you have to allocate 3 or 4 hours to recruiting. So how do I shorten my day allocated to other tasks from 10 to 6? It's more like, let's expand that 8 or 10 to have another 3, because this is an extracurricular activity. This is something that can't wait, and we have to find time, and it will be worth it in the long term.
Yeah, well, and especially in this type of market where getting good quality talent has been, I think, my personal opinion, as hard as it's ever been in the 20 years I've been in the profession. Finding the time and allotting for it, and the ideas that you had doing walks and in persons, like it sounds like there's a lot of different playbooks in hand, which there should be, right? For an activity as important as this, there's no like one size fits all approach. And I wanted to get from you some ideas around selling the interviewers, right? I mean, the reality is a lot of these like accounting managers and assistant controllers and controllers are probably playing the field as they should when they're looking for a new role or new job. So how much selling do you do during the interview process to really make sure that the candidate is also attracted to your company?
I love that question. First of all, I would say I do not think about the interview process as a selling process. I think about it as a process where both parties are making an honest attempt to evaluate whether they're a good fit for each other. It's all about, from a company perspective, is this the right candidate from us? And from candidates' perspective, is this the right company that I want to join? I think if we think about regular life, if we think about making friends, dating, whatever it may be, I think we will never say, hey, let's make sure that we sell ourselves in a particular way. I think it's almost always about making sure we're comfortable with each other and making sure that we're the right fit. One of my biggest fears as an interviewer and as potentially a hiring manager is that I will say something in the interview that will not be accurate. The person will then join the company, will work there, will see me in the hallway, and I will feel uncomfortable walking by them because I sold them on some idea that's not realistic, and now they're in the role and they're not liking it, they're not enjoying it. That's one of my biggest fears. I don't want to do that. I actually view one of my primary responsibilities in the interview is to point out the negatives of the job. I feel like the positives are going to come out. They're going to be everywhere. They're going to be on the company website. They're going to hear them from other people in the interviews. They will get to the positives through the questions that they ask. And also just the fact that I am the hiring manager or one of the interviewers on the panel, the fact that I'm at the company, the fact that I will show enthusiasm just through normal conversation, I think that's sufficient endorsement to say, yeah, I believe the company where I'm at is the company that the person should join. And I don't think that I need to do additional selling. I think I can focus on things that I believe will be the challenge in the role. It may be that a particular team is working too hard. It may be that they have dependencies on other teams that they still need to work through to make sure there's better sync cross collaboratively. It may be some other stuff. Whatever it is, I view that as my primary responsibility, so that both parties end up entering the working relationship on knowledgeable terms with true and right expectations. And if a challenge that I'm presenting is not the right challenge for the candidate, then they have an opportunity to self-select out of the process. And if they choose to join and then they encounter this challenge, they'll be ready for it. They will have given it appropriate thought. And I think they will appreciate the honesty. I think that the quality of relationship is much better right off the bat if we start on very honest, very cool-headed terms, rather than on pumped up excitement about something. So I would say I do not think of that process as a selling process. I think of it more as a process where we're just trying to figure out if we're going to work together well.
I'll tell you what, Senad, for accountants like me, and I know a lot of us have very similar personalities, that level of like genuine, like credibility and just like letting an accountant know what they're getting themselves into is a selling point, right? That they can, have this relationship of trust, that they know what they're going to get into, whether it's an S1 that needs to be filed in 2 months or, something else. I think a lot of us would appreciate that. So yeah, it's not like sales or marketing roles where you probably want to just, kind of build up on the hype and, get them through the recruiting process with a lot of energy and enthusiasm. But for us, there's a lot of value in just knowing like truly what we're getting into and having an objective approach to sharing what the job is about.
Totally. And I think that we spend sufficient amount of time at work to where, eventually or almost immediately, we will be bringing our true self, our true, relatively unfiltered self to the job. I think sometimes we spend too much time thinking about the interviewing philosophy or, I remember back in college, like, oh, you should do a handshake like this, or you should not do a handshake like that when you meet. And it's like, just bring yourself to the process. Let's sit down and let's talk about this and see if we want to continue a working relationship after the interview. Don't worry about the handshake. It'll be fine.
Yeah, I remember that. Oh gosh, that goes way back. And that was the days of the paper resume. And I had my portfolio too. Firm handshake, look them in the eye.
Yeah.
That brings back a lot of memories. And also just going back to the point of just sharing what they're going to get into, like frankly, especially if you're coming from the Big Four, whatever you're going to get into is probably, a couple notches down from what you're experiencing with the grind of a Big Four anyway. So if you have to say, hey, our team is going to be working on a S1 filing in 3 months, maybe 10-hour days or 12-hour days, it's still like relative to what they were, maybe used to in the Big Four, still lower. But I think the key thing, regardless of, what that is, I think just being transparent about like what the situation is the most important part of all this. For transparency's sake, Senad, I think we are having such a great conversation with just the recruiting part. I wanted to ask you about like growth and development and retention, but I think I want to spend the rest of the time we have here on recruiting, and maybe we can save that topic for another episode, because, some other questions that I normally get from the community is, should I, in growing my team, like look at the Big Four as an important criteria, or, are the times different now? Like, what's your philosophy on Big Four versus non-Big Four?
I do not believe that we should discriminate against any type of professional background. Whether a person comes from Big Four or not from Big Four should not be a definitive deciding factor. I think that it kind of depends on what type of company you're running. That should tell you how much value in the interview process and decision process you should ascribe to a specific type of experience. So if you have a very much a built-out organization with a lot of departments, a lot of people, and if that organization has been stable for a number of years, it is likely that within that organization, you will have certain roles that when you're trying to fill them, you are looking for a particular type of background, particular type of experience. And that is okay. If that is your situation, that's totally fine. But I'm coming from a high growth environment, so I'll speak primarily to that. In the high growth environment, a lot more than a specific experience, the two things that are a lot more important are number one, passion, and number two, ability to learn. About passion, when I say passion, what I mean is, some jobs are going to require more work, more dedication, more problem solving than others. And so it is important to assess that there is a right match in terms of the passion that's required by the job and the passion that's going to be brought into the job by the individual. If you can assess that, and if those things can match, there's a higher likelihood of success. The ability to learn is extremely important. And in my opinion, in a high growth environment on an accounting team goes way beyond specific experience. Because when companies grow very fast, they change, they evolve. Every 6 months, every 12 months, they completely change. And so if you are solving for a particular type of experience, that solution can maybe last 3, 6, or 12 months, but not beyond that. Beyond that, you're going to require of the person that you brought into the team to learn something new, to adapt, to figure out how to adapt not just themselves, but the entire organization to this new landscape that you're seeing 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road. And so ability to learn and passion, in my opinion, are a lot more important than a specific experience. And so whether a person comes from a Big Four background or not doesn't matter as much as those other two factors to me.
That's true. I can think of two reasons why what you shared there is spot on. I mean, one is whatever technical experiences you want to get out of a Big Four candidate, probably just source out on a technical level, on a ad hoc, non-permanent level. But someone's adaptability to change is not something that you can source out, right? And so, I think you and I probably know accountants who would prefer to be in a non-dynamic tech environment and just have repeatability, kind of learn in a incremental way, but not at the same level that you and I probably experience in startups. So looking for those people and those candidates that have that attribute, it's definitely, I agree with you 100%. That is more valuable to an accounting organization at a startup. And the ability to learn is critical. And so I've joked about this a few times actually with in other episodes, but I've come across accountants earlier in my career where they would not even have the curiosity to understand what the company that they're working for actually sells, right? And what the revenue model is. So I think that curiosity it lends itself to people that are more dynamic and willing to adapt to change. And I think what you shared there is spot on. And it's the tech companies too, by the way, that are doing these really crazy hiring, really big hiring batches. So I think, having that frame of mind is pretty important to building a team.
I think so. And I don't mean to devalue experience. There is definitely value in experience. And I think that if somebody comes with more experience to the company, they're probably going to be able to land at a role that's higher level than somebody who doesn't have experience. But even with experience, the ability to further evolve and further learn is more important than that experience itself.
Yeah. Well, and I should have teed up earlier the question with, in my past, I think some of the folks that I've been around have been just very adamant that you need to see Big Four on the resume. And I think, to the points that we're making, unfairly just writing off really good potential candidates because of that. So, I was kind of secretly aligned with what you shared there, because I think it's critical. If you take out the pool of non-Big Four accountants, I think you're missing out on a big opportunity to find some rock stars.
Absolutely. And Jotham, you were secretly thinking that. It's not a secret anymore. It's now out in the public. Yes. So you're good.
We got it out on this podcast.
You're good.
Accomplished.
Yeah.
And Senad, as we wrap up today's show, which has been incredible, and I think our audience is going to love just hearing these different perspectives, because a lot of accounting managers or controllers and chief accounting officers may not have gone through this process yet because they're going from traditional industry to tech. So knowing what to do here is going to be very valuable. But just as a takeaway, Senad, so let's just say I'm a controller. I've got like 10 roles to fill, senior accountants, accounting managers, stock admin, all these different roles. Like, what's your number one advice for a controller in this example, as they're now charged with this very important responsibility of building a team?
Well, I would go back to focusing on passion and ability to learn. And I would suggest, I would challenge hiring managers to come up with ways to assess those two aspects. For me, what is helpful is I have an accounting question that I ask all accounting candidates, regardless of the level that they are applying for. And it's an accounting question that is simple enough on the surface, but it does have a lot of gray areas underneath that we can dive into and speak about. And I do not expect people to answer that question with 100% accuracy at all. In fact, maybe only 5% of candidates give the correct answer. I'm looking more for a good, comfortable initial answer, initial response. And then that gives us an opportunity to work through the deeper aspects of that accounting problem. And through that, I can assess how well the person responds to feedback, how quickly they learn the concepts that we talk through, how comfortable they are engaging in a conversation that is about accounting. And those dimensions give me a pretty good insight into both the passion for accounting profession, passion for the topic, as well as the person's ability to learn. So I would say recognizing that those two dimensions are important and then figuring out ways to assess them in an interview would be my primary advice. Number one. And maybe number two is making sure that we don't over-focus on selling, that we're honest and upfront about both the positives and the negatives in the interview process. I think that will lead to better results and happier companies, teams, and recruits if we do that.
I love it. Yeah, the latter about just transparency and being forthcoming about the role. So incredibly important. And again, making sure that accountants know what they're signing up for. So now this has been an incredible discussion, and actually the second topic that we never got to. Hopefully we can get you back on another episode for that. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jonathan. My pleasure.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want more information, please check us out at gapify.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.